Hello and welcome to Voices of Women, sponsored by the Bristol County Commission on the Status of Women. I'm your host, Gail from the YWCA Southeastern Massachusetts, and welcome to our annual show discussing the Oscars and the films up for Academy Awards. So welcome back to our esteemed panel. I think third year in a row now that we've done this, so it's a tradition, and I know that the show is well received and well liked and well viewed by everyone out there. So hope you're ready to hear about our films. So can everyone introduce themselves again?
Sure. Hi, I'm Juli Parker. I am the Assistant Dean of Students and Director of the Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality at UMass Dartmouth, and I am also currently the President of the YWCA Board of Southeastern Massachusetts.
Hi, I'm Jane Gonsalves. I am a member of the board of the YWCA of Southeastern Mass and also a big film lover.
My name is Ashley Bendiksen. I think I've had a different job every time I've been up here and introduced myself, but I'm a professional speaker and presenter on many issues in the student market and in women's conferences and different related events, and I'm also a public relations and communications consultant for local businesses, nonprofits, and events.
Well, thank you again for being here and for taking the time to watch this film. So there are 9 films nominated this year for the Academy Awards, which is coming up in a few weeks. So just as a reminder, maybe Julie, you can remind everyone what we're looking for in the Bechdel test when we're viewing the films?
Certainly. So the Bechdel test is a test developed by Alison Bechdel, who's a lesbian comic writer. Interesting fact about her is there's a musical about her life growing up in a funeral home called Fun Home, which I highly recommend. It's a great, great, great musical. And her test gives 3 questions about movies to represent women. 1, are there 2 women in the movie who have names? 2, do they talk to each other? 3, not about a man. This test has also been expanded since it first came out, and I did a little research, and there's a couple of different tests that can be applied to LGBT people as well as people of color. There's a test called the Sphinx test that asks about the interaction of women with other characters as well as how prominently they're featured within the story. There's the test called the Vito Russo test that Jane and I were talking about earlier. That's about representation of LGBT characters. Does the film have a character that's an LGBT and is not predominantly defined by their sexual orientation or gender identity? The Duvernay test asks whether African Americans and other minorities are not playing props kind of or scenery, but have fully realized lives. So we think about kind of expanding that Bechdel test a little bit when we talk about the movies that we're going to judge today. But we will be using that as the main focus of our criticism. And then, of course, there's this very hard test called the Mako Mari test that asks whether the female character has a narrative arc that is not about supporting a man's story. So we were thinking even the movies that pass the Bechdel test, they might not ever pass this Mako Mari test.
All right, well, great. Well, thank you, Julie, for that information. So we'll start with you, Jane, and the post.
Okay, so I just saw the post this week, loved it. All my favorite subjects. It's about politics, it's about government, it's about feminism and the Vietnam War. So very interesting topics. Interestingly enough, it does pass the Bechdel test, but just barely because there's more than 2 actually female characters with speaking parts, but in the case of, there were only 2 reporters that were female in the newsroom at the Washington Post in the story. One who was in the lifestyle section, just as we would expect. The other one does do hard news and does have a role in the film, but does not speak with the publisher, who's Katharine Graham. That's the female lead in the story, played by Meryl Streep. But Meryl Streep does have a conversation with her daughter, whose name I don't think was ever said, but she does have a speaking part. About the business and how the business she grew up with the business. Briefly, the story is that Katharine Graham inherited the business. First, her father owned the business and she grew up with it. And then he gave it to her son when he retired. Her husband when he retired. And then she had no interest in taking the business at that point. She never expected to run a business. Then when her husband committed suicide at a young age, and so she ended up running the Washington Post. And at the time of the movie, they present the Washington Post as a local paper versus what we now know the Washington Post to be. And this was one of the seminal events that resulted in the Washington Post becoming an important paper on the world stage, an important newspaper. And it's about the release of the Ellsberg papers and how the release of those Pentagon Papers told the real story about the government and their involvement in the Vietnam War, keeping the United States in the war, even when they had predictions that we could not win that war, and the human costs associated with that. And so that became an issue of free press because Nixon, who was the president at the time, wanted to stop it from being published. Directed by Steven Spielberg. Thank you very much. So it is a big Spielberg epic. You know, it tells broad themes. It's got beautiful cinematography. And again, in almost all the scenes, Katharine Graham is the only woman in the room. And there are no men of color either. They're all white men with her, and they're always trying to tell her what to do. And oftentimes she asks for advice, which is fine. Everyone can ask. Any leader can ask for advice from other leaders, but she asks for advice, and they pretend to be paternalistic about their advice to her and expect her to do what they say, even though it's her paper to run. So that's an interesting theme that also underlies the movie. And there are a couple of scenes where she walks through a crowd of women who are in traditional employment, like stenographers in one scene, mostly women of color. And then another scene, there are women outside the Supreme Court that are anti-war protesters. And she walks through them, and in one case she's walking up a flight, and then in another case walking down a flight of stairs. And I think it's sort of emblematic of the role that she played at that time as a woman in a non-traditional field, being the publisher of a newspaper, and how that maybe affected women that came after her.
Interesting. And very historically accurate?
It appeared to be. I was only 12 at the time, but yeah, I don't remember all the details of that. I do remember Daniel Ellsberg, the name. I remember the Pentagon Papers, and I obviously remember Vietnam. So they made it look like the publishing of those papers resulted in the anti-war sentiment. And I don't think that's really the case, but they kind of connected the two. And then there's a reference to Watergate later on because, of course, the free press and, holding the government accountable are themes in this movie, and then that carries over, obviously. But it's funny because they say in the movie, Katharine Graham and Ben Bradley, the editor, that this was the moment when things changed for the press and they could no longer be friends with people in elected office. And I thought of Watergate as that moment.
Right.
But they present it as being part of this story. So
Okay, well,
I
all
love
right.
Meryl Streep.
Sweet.
I just
No,
think
she's
Just
a
for her.
great actress.
it was and Tom Hanks played
Yeah.
Ben Bradley.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, and like I said, the themes in it are really interesting and actually so relevant today as well.
Absolutely.
Sadly.
But we won't go there today. I don't think we have enough time allotted to get into
I know,
that.
sorry I talked too long, but I
no,
really
but
like
that's
the movie.
okay. That's okay. So next we'll
Yeah.
talk about let's
You're
see,
welcome.
Get Out. We'll talk about that. I think Ashley and Julie, you both
Want me to start?
Sure, you can.
watch that. Okay.
So I watched Get Out a long time ago, and I just had a refresher with a student, fortunately, who loved the movie. So we were able to talk more about the themes in the movie. So Get Out was directed by Jordan Peele. First nomination for a director. Fifth time a black man has been nominated for Best Director. Fifth out of what, 90 Academy Awards? Is that what we're at?
I think so.
So it's also, I think, the first time that the genre of a horror movie has been nominated for Best Picture. So while it is a horror movie, I would say it's more, there's some comedy in it, as well as, I wouldn't say it's your typical horror, like blood and guts kind of horror. It's more of a thriller, but almost like a mind, very much of a mind-twisting piece. And the story is about this young man who goes with his white girlfriend, he's black, with his white girlfriend to meet her family for the weekend. They live out in the woods and, a beautiful home. And come to find out, there's a plot, basically, that this family finds well-physiqued African Americans and basically does brain transplants on them through hypnosis and neurosurgery. So
Wow.
yeah, it's pretty dark. And so the story is about kind of him trying to figure out kind of who these people are that they have two servants that are there that are black, and who they are and how they're connected to the story, and then him escaping from this situation. And there's a lot of comments on race in this, and there is some comedy in the sense of kind of how bizarre it is.
Right.
Like, aren't they auctioning him off? Like, isn't there a portrait of him?
Yes.
And they're all bidding on him or something?
Yes.
Yeah. Like, very overt, racist jokes.
There's definitely a bit with bingo cards.
Yeah.
So I think it was good for me to watch it twice because it certainly was. There's a lot.
It has a lot of levels.
To unpack. Yeah. So it does barely pass the Bechdel test. There's a conversation between the mother and the housekeeper, who you'll find out isn't really the housekeeper at the end, and as well as the mother and the daughter about this annual party that they're having. That they say is this party that they have every year to honor the grandparents, but it really is the auction where they have brought another person there who will then have one of their rich friends will basically have his brain put into this person's body. So it's,
And what is the purpose of that?
Well, the physique, right? So it's really about how this physique
That they're strong and that they have, things that white people don't have. So they're, basically just using them to extract that stuff. Yeah, it's really weird. I haven't seen it in so long too.
Okay.
Yeah, so it definitely was like
the whole car ride home. I was like, oh my god, but like digesting what I had just watched and just I don't know. I could probably watch it like 3-4 times and keep taking stuff from it.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's definitely a movie you want to watch with people where you can talk about it afterwards. So, but it's good. I recommend it, and I don't think it's as blood and gutsy like if you're scared of a horror
like
movie.
the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Which you can all watch.
Okay, so we won't spoil that for people.
Right. That's why I try to leave out
who
the servants are in that part. But yeah, so it barely passes again. So, but mostly because of the mother and the daughter and the mother and the housekeeper.
All right, great, thank you. All right, so Ashley, let's talk about Dunkirk.
Sure. Again, another one. I saw Dunkirk probably like a year ago. And as expected, it did not pass. It's a very historically accurate portrayal of the efforts to evacuate U.S. troops from Dunkirk, France. And to be honest, it got so many really good reviews, but there really isn't much of a plot line to it or any character development. Not many people at all have names. It's just a really well done picture of what that was like on the shores. You almost just feel like you are in the war, and I think that's why people found it to be so powerful, is that it was just 2 straight hours of just this whole scene. But yeah, interestingly, like there were no main characters at all. You'd be following 4 guys around, and then all of a sudden one of them just dies, and it's like, okay. Like it was good, but very few women. I think if anything, I remember that there were a few scenes where they showed men being taken care of, back in America, and there were nurses like moving around in the background, but no female characters whatsoever.
Someone said there was like a hospital ship offshore that got blown up.
Yes.
So there might have been women on that.
Yeah. Right. But we didn't see them.
But they didn't see them.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And then they died.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Like beautiful. Like the cinematography was great. But it was really just, it was almost like people have said it's almost like just like a documentary, like you were just watching this battle scene for 2 hours. But that was it. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, Jane, 3 billboards.
3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri. So it's an interesting
Directed
story.
by.
So yeah, who directed that?
It's Martin McDonough.
Okay, Martin McDonough. Right. So the lead on this is played by Frances McDormand, who, like Meryl Streep, I could pretty much watch do anything. And interestingly, Woody Harrelson is one of the male leads in the movie. And he's great. So, he has overcome his original role as Woody in the bar. But the story is a mother who is angry about the rape and murder of her daughter, which has remained unsolved for a year in a small town, Ebbing, Missouri. And so she, in an effort to get the police moving, erects 3 billboards, questioning them on what they're doing. And the last billboard names the sheriff by name. And as a result, it almost feels like biblical to me is the word I use, is a lot of bad things happen. She takes that action, and the reactions and the resulting reactions are bad, really bad. It's a dark movie. It does pass the Bechdel test because her daughter is shown in flashback, and Angela, and she speaks with her, and sadly, the day that she goes to her death, they have a huge argument and say some really nasty things to each other. And so she does have a conversation with her. She also, I think, has a conversation with her employer, who owns a gift shop, about the situation with the billboards. So that also is a conversation that's not about a man. But it's a great movie because at the end there is some suggestion of redemption on the part of her and the villain in the piece, who is not the murderer, by the way, but who is the person who plays the negative role, who's the villain. There is some redemption. They come to terms with each other and go on an errand that suggests, it's ambiguous how it's going to end, but it suggests redemption on their part. So it does pass the Bechdel test. It's a great movie. It's dark, but interesting, very interesting movie. And she provides, I mean, I think in a sense she's a great it's a really great character, because for a female character, she lives alone. Well, she lives with her son, but she's divorced. She has no male partner. She stands on her own. And she makes these decisions on her own without discussing them with anybody, and repeatedly tells people she doesn't need anybody. She's going to do this all on her own. So she's a very strong person.
Okay, well, thank you. Julie, Lady Bird?
Lady Bird. So, Lady Bird, directed by first-time director Greta Gerwig, also nominated for Best Director,
Yay.
5th woman ever, along with Jordan Peele. So the number 5, of course, just one woman and one person of color, and then everybody else is a white male. So this is a coming-of-age story about a mother and a daughter. The mother is played by Laurie Metcalf of Roseanne fame, who's incredible. And it's pretty much about their relationship. So the whole movie, in fact, I read one comment that someone said it's almost a reverse Bechdel, because there's only maybe one conversation where a man is even brought into the conversation. Yeah.
Nice.
So, and she does have a father. Like they're married, so there is a daughter with parents. Just a real coming-of-age story that I think a lot of women would really resonate with in terms of their relationships with their mothers as they're teenagers, and that troubling time.
And she's a Catholic school student.
And I've heard from a lot of people who are Catholic that they can really resonate with the whole Catholic school piece as well. That there's some interesting stuff that goes along with that. I thought it was excellent. A whole storyline too with her and her girlfriend, and the trouble that girls have when they're teenagers, and how they have falling outs with their girlfriends, and then they kind of come back to that. I thought it was excellent. It was a really compelling story. Kind of her getting ready to go to college. Funny, lots of funny parts. And again, obviously it passes on all levels. And we're pretty excited that this, and she wrote it as well, the director, Greta Gerwig wrote it as well. So a real new upcoming, young woman who's written this screenplay and directed it as well.
All right, great.
It's so
Sounds
nice to
good.
hear, because I feel like now that I'm watching these movies, it's so hard to find that one moment where they're not talking about a man. Like we were saying, they all pass, so slimly.
It's like you put that lens on and now you can't take it off.
It's hard.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Well, I still think, can I just make
Sure.
a comment on
Yeah.
that? It kind of raises the issue that we have to be aware of, that even though there are like a Greta Gerwigs in the world and Ava DuVernay's and Catherine Bigelow's, they're so small. So even when a director is a woman, the stories are still being written by and financed
Catherine
by.
Bigelow's,
Right. But, well, yeah. By,
I mean, her two movies were about
written,
war,
right?
Right.
So they're written by men. So they're being told
Yes,
by.
yes,
They're a
good
man's
point.
perspective on the
Yep.
world. They're men's stories, and men are financing them. And that's really the bottom line. Is that there are not. I can't name one. I mean, major producers that are female that own
Oprah.
Oprah. There you go. I mean, Sandra Bullock has her own production company.
Right.
There are other
and
stars
Ava
that do.
DuVernay's starting, and Shonda Rhimes, right?
Right, Shonda Rhimes, right. So, can I just say something about Shonda Rhimes, though? I didn't mean to bring this up. I know we got more
Whatever
things
you
to talk
want to
about.
say,
No. Just I wanted to say, though, the last few episodes of Thursday night, of course, the Shonda Rhimes show, and the last few episodes of Grey's have been really, really timely storylines and very preachy. And I say, go for it, girl, because I'm telling you, she's saying that she is powerful enough, like Oprah
tell
now,
those stories,
to tell
tell
those
those
stories
stories.
and tell them the way she wants them from her perspective.
goosebumps
And
saying that.
I love it, and I just love it because it shows that there may be. I'm still not convinced we're at a turning point after all that's happened this year. I'm not convinced that this is the turning point yet, but we're getting there, and we're close to that corner for sure. Because like Shonda Rhimes can put on 3 shows in a row and tell her story from her point of view, and yay.
All right.
All right, so
yeah,
I just had to throw that out
that's
there.
it fit.
Good for Thursday night.
Okay.
So Ashley, Shape of Water?
Sure. So So I was super excited to go see Shape of Water. It was playing at a little theater down the street from me that I love, and I loved the poster, I loved the trailer. I was super excited to see it. It was really good and a very different kind of movie, a little mix of sci-fi and romance, and just a really fun movie. It's basically about this woman, Eliza. She is a mute, so she signs throughout the movie, and she works in this high-security government lab where they're testing all different specimens and things they've taken from other countries. And long story short, there's this creature that they've rescued from South Africa that they hold in a tank, and she develops this romantic connection with him because they can communicate, you know, even though she has no voice, and she feels like he sees her when the rest of the world sees her as so different, whereas she's something special to him. So it's a really cool little storyline. But she works in the lab alongside Octavia Spencer, who plays the role of Zelda. So they're both like cleaning ladies. They clean up the labs, they clean the bathrooms, you know, locker rooms, all of that. And there's so many scenes where they're talking back and forth. You know, not obviously not as much Eliza, but her Octavia Spencer's character.
She can't talk.
Exactly. She communicates.
Yeah, communicates.
But so Zelda and her talk, and most of the time, you know, they're like scrubbing toilets, and she's just going on and on about her husband and the men they work for, and all they're talking about is just men the whole time. So, you know, I just felt like when you work alongside someone, there's opportunities to talk about the news and the world and your kids and a million other things. And I just thought there were so many opportunities where they could have had a conversation, not about a man. However, it did pass Bechdel ever so slightly because in the beginning, Eliza is coming in late to work, and Zelda says, just skip me in line so you can clock in. And one woman in the back named Yolanda says, why are you always letting her skip the line? And so that's it. And so it passed because of that. But that was all. And I had to really think about it and go back. And, you know, at first I didn't think it passed at all. But very fun movie, very cool. What was interesting about it is I thought that most of their interactions were going to be her on the outside and him behind the glass. And she actually, like halfway through the movie, takes him out of there. And he's like living in her apartment, like in the tub. So there was a lot of interaction between her and him. They actually have sex. Yes. Like, yeah, you gotta see him. He's like a creature, but yeah, very. Yeah, she has to fill the bathroom with water, like plugs up. Anyway, but fun movie.
Okay, so we'll have to see that.
Yeah, definitely different, unique, very fun film.
Okay.
And that was directed by Guillermo del Toro, right?
Yes.
Yes, also nominated for Best Director.
Okay, wonderful.
Right.
I think so. I believe so.
Yep.
All right, great. So let's see. Darkest Hour. Julie, do you have some information on that?
So I did not see Darkest Hour, but I do know that it's a story about Churchill. And talked to a good colleague of mine about it's very, I think, like Dunkirk, like The Post, kind of very documentary style about who he was, played by Lithgow?
Gary Oldman.
Oh, Gary Oldman. No women conversations at all, so definitely does not pass the Bechdel test. But I've heard excellent things about the movie.
Yeah.
And I think it did get good reviews.
Yeah, it got really good. I mean, it's nominated for Best Picture. So, directed by Joe Wright is the director for that.
Okay, so good. And Call Me By Your Name.
This is a coming-of-age story about two young men in Italy. One of them is a little bit younger, and the other one is like a doctoral student. And it's really a coming-of-age, kind of coming out as gay story, directed by Luca, I'm not going to say this right, Guadagnone? Is it French? And also has gotten great reviews as well. I think mixed reviews, actually, by some folks.
Okay. And last is Phantom Thread.
Phantom Thread, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, is the movie. Now I'm going to forget the actor's name.
Daniel
Day-Lewis,
Day-Lewis,
who says it's his last movie.
He said he's retired.
Right. So the story is that he runs some famous House of Woodcock, which is his interesting title for fashion, and he seems to have a history, I think, of weird relationships with women, suffering over the death of his mother. His sister lives with him, and kind of he goes through a series of different women, and then he kind of picks up this waitress, and they become involved in this very kind of power struggle relationship that involves poisonings and, her bringing him back to health. And then think her kind of figuring out that if he's sick, he's more needy. And that seems to be kind of the theme a little bit of this. And the Phantom Thread is connected with these messages that he puts in all of his all of the designs that he makes. I don't know if that passes the Bechdel test. Everything I read says it doesn't. Which you'd think with the sister and the lover living there, but they're probably just talking about him. You know,
probably.
So that's probably where that comes from. So I think that's all of them, right?
I will just add to
Yeah.
like, some of the other tests you were talking about earlier. So
Yeah.
in Shape of Water, her neighbor is an older gay man, and just we talked about like not just painting them as so stereotypical gay men. You know, he's a painter, he's alone, and like his only real like personal struggle in the movie is there's like a diner where he thinks the guy serving behind the counter is attractive, and he goes there and gets like the same slice of pie every day, and then like the guy finally rejects him, and it's just so like, you know, there's other things that guy could have had going on in his life.
Like it was
you
just
know?
about his sexuality.
Yeah, you know, or just, you know, making him a painter, you know, just, I don't know, just the images of that people have of, you know, what a gay man would do for a
Right, so
living.
that wouldn't pass the Vito Russo test
Right,
then.
No.
right.
Right.
Yeah,
But there was a woman of color in Shape of Water that had a good role, say Octavia Spencer.
Yeah,
Yes.
she's great.
And what about, did the Post have any people of color? You said no.
No, just
Stenographers, I think you said.
yeah, just
Some
the
of
one
them.
scene where she walked through
Oh,
like
the
a sea of
stenographers.
stenographers to get to this fancy dining room at the stock exchange. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even Get Out, if you think about, I mean, it is kind of written about this racial piece. You've got the lead character, and then you've got his friend who he's talking to a lot on the phone, who works as a TSA agent, and then the two characters who are the servants that work at the house, and then there's another guy who this has already been done to. You realize later on who's with this woman who clearly his brain is her former husband, but the body is, you know, this person that they've brought to this, you know, place. So I think if you look at kind of,
I don't have so many questions in my
I
head
know,
now.
like
Now
just
you
to
have
watch
to
that
look
now,
at-
just to see it.
yeah, you definitely
how
have to
this
see
works.
it.
It was so good.
interesting.
Like, once I watched it, I was like, that was amazing. Like I loved it right away. Like it sounds bizarre, but if you see it, you'll like it.
Yeah.
Okay. So our final thoughts to wrap up. I know there's so much has gone on this year with the Me Too movement and the lack of diversity again in film and who's being nominated, but we definitely need to support directors of color, women in these roles when these movies come out. And it doesn't seem like they stay around too quickly.
Right.
Too, but we really need to make
Well,
some
and they
efforts
say
for
right,
that.
like you have to go when they open. Right? So
Absolutely.
when the
Opening
movie
weekend.
opens, the weekend the movie opens, we have to go support women directors and stories about women. Stories about women of color, stories about people of color. That has to be, I think, our mission. And I think the Time's Up group, we can at least give kudos to the women in Hollywood who are putting this organization together that will not just be about rich Hollywood women, but it sounds like that they're going to have access to support, farm working women who have sexual harassment claims. And, I'm with Jane that I don't feel like the arc of justice is bending enough yet.
Right.
I said the last time I was here on the Me Too conversation that I thought this was happening when Anita Hill went before the Senate, 20 plus years ago. And I think there's a backlash happening now too. I think you really see a big backlash coming out that, Me Too's going too far and that, we're trying to, feminists are trying to, go after men and ruin their
Issues
careers.
about due process, concerns about that lack of due process, and people are being fired and whatever without due process, without investigations, and
Yeah.
But we still need to have our voices heard. People still need to speak up, and
Well,
that's
it goes
the
back
important
to,
things.
Women don't lie about these things. The majority of women don't lie.
I agree.
So it's
Right.
like,
Always
granted,
said
we
that.
can't investigate it yet, but why would someone just make this stuff up? Very rare situations.
Right.
And I think that goes back to where that comes from, right? That women aren't believed for so many things, And part of it is, look at how we're represented. We're never seen as the character, the main story, the arc, the narrative.
Right.
And I think that's a piece that we need to really start. You know, and I also think I work with college students, you know, and I talk to them about this, and they haven't even thought about it, you know, and, you know, it's like that lens that we just talked about. You put it on, then you can't watch a movie without being like, there was no women in that movie, or there was no this in that movie, you know, and then you're kind of like, oh, you know, you kind of get disgusted
No one wants
with
to
it.
go to the movies with us.
I know, right?
I don't want to watch anything with you.
And I think we have this, you know, and I don't know if I said this last year, I feel like I did, but I feel like TV is the place now where we're seeing more of that diversity.
Yes,
We're seeing all
absolutely.
these great stories being told about women on television in a way that I think because there's a more of a freedom, right, than Hollywood.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Well, thank you all again, you know, for doing this. Definitely we'll do this again next year, and we appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you. Hope you all get to watch some of these movies, and thank you for watching Voices of Women.